The bourbon hit my jacket at 8:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because checking my watch is habit. 22 years in business after 15 years Army Rangers, you learn to timestamp everything that matters. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I'm 51 years old. I run Sullivan Strategic Investments. And at that moment, I was the only person in that ballroom who could authorize $2.4 billion to move. Not 1 cent had transferred yet. That detail becomes important later. The Whitfield Infrastructure Gala was the kind of event that looks impressive from outside, but feels hollow once you're inside. Glass walls, gold fixtures, 300 guests who spent more energy managing appearances than running their businesses. Donors, analysts, board members, all circling one family name, Whitfield. I'd been there 30 minutes. Same suit I've worn to these things for 6 years. Guest badge, no assistant, no security detail, just me standing near the bar, running through the evening's objectives. In Afghanistan, we called it situational awareness. Here, it's due diligence. Same principle, different battlefield. I was cataloging the room. Handshakes needed. Intel to gather on Preston Whitfield before tomorrow's board meeting. Exit routes, just in case. Old habits from Kandahar die hard. That's when Austin walked over. Austin Whitfield, 31 years old. VP of Operations, Preston's son. The kind of guy who learned what power looks like before he learned what power costs. Never served a day, never built anything from scratch. He had that walk of someone who'd never been told no in a room his family owned. I recognized the type from my corporate years. Silver spoon operators who mistake inherited position for earned authority. He glanced at my badge, then at my suit. Standard issue conference attire, nothing flashy. In my line of work, you learn that real money doesn't advertise itself. Austin apparently hadn't learned that lesson yet. Then he reached past me for a drink tray, and his bourbon glass tilted down the front of my jacket. Slow, deliberate. Physics doesn't work that way by accident. He stepped back, looked me over with that smirk rich kids perfect in prep school, and said it loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Military contractors should use the service entrance old timer. A few people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. The sound hit different than it should have. Reminded me of forward operating base Chapman, 2004, different kind of laughter, same dismissive tone. Some things translate across all battlefields. I looked at him for maybe 2 seconds, not deciding what to say. I wasn't going to say anything. I was reading him, the smirk, the posture, how he glanced around to confirm the room saw it. This wasn't an accident and it wasn't spontaneous, it was performance. A power play designed to establish hierarchy in front of witnesses. I flipped my challenge coin once. Army Rangers, 75th Regiment. Old habit when I'm processing tactical data. The weight of it in my palm, familiar as my own heartbeat. Sergeant Major Rodriguez gave it to me the day I made captain. Leadership isn't about the rank, he'd said. It's about the decisions you make when nobody's watching. Right now, 200 people were watching, but the principle held. Then I looked across the room. Victoria Whitfield, Preston's wife, was standing 10 feet away. She'd seen the whole thing. I know because our eyes met for half a second. Not embarrassment in her expression, not disapproval. Just acknowledgement, like watching someone step in a puddle, unfortunate, but not her problem. Then she turned toward another group, like she'd just watched someone drop a napkin. That turn told me everything I needed to know about the Whitfield family culture. It wasn't Austin being young and stupid. It was institutional. Approved behavior, tacitly endorsed by leadership. I didn't wipe the jacket. Bourbon soaking through to my shirt, but I didn't move to clean it. Didn't say a word to Austin. I stood there and let the room see exactly what happened, who did it, who laughed, who looked away. In the Rangers, we had a saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Austin and his family had just shown me exactly who they were. Then I thought, I haven't transferred a single dollar yet. Let me explain how this works, because it matters for everything that follows. Sullivan Strategic had committed $2.4 billion to Whitfield Infrastructure. Massive deal. 5-year modernization plan, staged performance releases, press releases drafted, photos taken. Preston gave quotes to industry magazines about entering a new era for the company. Congressional representatives issued statements about job creation and American infrastructure leadership. But none of the money had moved. Not $1. Because commitment on paper isn't capital in motion. Final authorization requires me to make one phone call and say execute. I don't do that remotely. Don't do it early. Don't do it until I've seen enough to know what I'm actually funding. Due diligence isn't just about balance sheets and revenue projections. It's about character assessment, leadership evaluation under pressure. I have a clause in every major deal I've made for the past 13 years. Section 14.2. Reputational conduct during negotiation affecting material standing triggers immediate withdrawal rights. No cure period, no negotiation. Immediate and irreversible. I added it after a situation in Afghanistan. Trusted the wrong officer during a joint operation near Fallujah. Captain seemed solid on paper. West Point graduate, good service record, came from military family. But when contact came, when real pressure hit, his character cracked. Cost me 3 good soldiers because I ignored the red flags, believed the resume instead of watching the behavior. Never again. The clause doesn't ask about intent, only impact. Doesn't matter if Austin meant to disrespect me or if it was just poor judgment. What matters is what it revealed about leadership culture, decision-making under observation, and institutional response to misconduct. My phone buzzed around 11 p.m. Text from Garrett Morrison. Incoming CEO scheduled to replace Preston next quarter. The message appeared on my screen while I was reviewing contract language in my hotel room. Hey, about earlier. That shouldn't have happened. I watched the typing indicator disappear twice before he sent it. Those pauses told me as much as the words. 4 sentences from a man about to run a $4 billion company. Man who stood in that ballroom, saw what happened, said nothing for 3 hours. Management by delayed text message. I wrote back, noted, thanks, set the phone down, thought clearly for a long time. Here's what 15 years military service teaches you about signals. Most business people watch for signals in the numbers, revenue trends, margin compression, debt ratios. Those matter. But the clearest signal about how an organization actually operates shows up somewhere else entirely. It shows up in how people at the top behave when they think the outcome is decided. Austin Whitfield thought the outcome was decided. Contract signed. Commitment announced. Political support secured. So did Victoria. So did every person in that ballroom who laughed or looked away. They thought I was a vendor. Someone there to be managed, not someone there to decide. Military contractor, in Austin's words. Service provider, not strategic partner. That was the last mistake any of them made. The boardroom next morning was set up with cameras. 3 angles, red lights blinking in the corners, internal feed running live to company servers. Preston called it transparency. Board members called it governance theater. I called it useful. Every word about to be spoken would be archived, time-stamped, legally documented. 14 people in that room. Directors, legal counsel, Garrett Morrison looking like he'd spent the night practicing damage control speeches. Colonel James Mitchell, my former commanding officer. Now their CFO sat 2 seats to my left. We'd served together in the 3rd Battalion. He knew what that challenge coin meant, knew what happened when I started flipping it during mission briefings. 2 investor relations representatives looked like they hadn't slept, probably hadn't. Word travels fast in our circles, not the details but the temperature. Something was off about the Whitfield deal. People were making calls, asking questions, repositioning portfolios just in case. I took a seat in the middle of the table. Not the head, not the far end. Somewhere I could watch everyone's face when things shifted. In Kandahar, we called it overwatch position. Clear sight lines, multiple exit routes, maximum tactical awareness. Preston opened the way he always opened. Standing at the head of the table, posture straight, voice measured like he was addressing shareholders. Historic transition, he said. Disciplined growth. Strategic alignment. Moving into the next phase of American infrastructure leadership. He had slides prepared. Charts showing projected job creation, economic impact studies, political endorsement letters. He'd done this presentation before, many times. You could tell because nothing he said required him to think while saying it. Muscle memory for corporate speak. The words of a man who'd spent 28 years in rooms where his authority was never questioned. I let him finish his first slide. Market projections, revenue targets, implementation timeline, all very impressive on paper. Then I said, we need to address last night. The room didn't explode. Just tightened half a degree, like pressure changing before a storm front moves through. Couple people glanced at each other. One director set down his pen. The investor relations woman to my right shifted in her chair, already calculating damage control scenarios. Preston didn't look at me immediately. Adjusted his cuff, Left hand over right, buying time, processing options. Social misunderstanding, he said finally. Nothing more than that. These things happen at large events. Mitchell was staring down at the binder in front of him. Didn't turn a page, didn't move at all. Just looked at it like it might say something helpful. We'd been in firefights together. Seen him keep perfect composure under Taliban mortar fire. But corporate politics made him nervous in ways combat never did. Garrett leaned forward slightly. Is this material to funding authorization? Careful word choice. Not does this matter, or is this important material? Already thinking like a lawyer. Already building legal distance between personal conduct and business operations. Preston answered before I could, absolutely not. We're not going to let minor social friction derail a strategic partnership. He used the word minor like it settled everything. Like repetition could change the weight of what happened. I didn't correct him. Not yet. In Afghanistan, we had a rule: never interrupt an enemy while he's making a tactical error. You don't interrupt a man while he's telling you exactly who he is, exactly what he values, exactly how he prioritizes damage control over accountability. Curtis Whitman, lead independent director, opened the agreement binder. Pages rustled in the quiet room. He was 20 years on various boards, understood corporate governance better than most attorneys. Found the section he was looking for, cleared his throat, read aloud with careful precision. Section 14.2, reputational conduct during negotiation or closing that materially impacts institutional standing may trigger immediate capital withdrawal rights. He paused, let that settle, then added quietly, no intent requirement specified. Impact measurement sufficient for activation. Preston gave a short laugh, dismissive, like Curtis had read from a phone book. Standard boilerplate language. Every major agreement has provisions like that. It's never been triggered over social events. These clauses exist for material breaches, fraud, criminal conduct, regulatory violations. Mitchell spoke without lifting his eyes from the table. It was revised at their specific request. His voice carried the flat authority of someone stating battlefield intelligence. No emotion, no interpretation, just facts. Silence. That one sentence did more work than anything I could have said, because it told everyone in the room that this clause wasn't standard corporate boilerplate. It was specific. It was intentional. It was put there deliberately by me for exactly this kind of situation, and Mitchell knew it because he'd spent 2 weeks negotiating against it before final contract approval. Several heads turned toward me. I didn't move, didn't clarify, didn't elaborate. Let the information sit. In the Rangers, we called it tactical patience. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing while your opponent processes new intelligence. Preston recalibrated quickly, I'll give him that. Shifted from dismissal to damage control without missing a beat. Look, we're not going to jeopardize a $2.4 billion partnership over social optics. One incident at a networking event. After hours, in formal setting, not in any official capacity. Your son was wearing a Whitfield infrastructure lanyard. Curtis said flatly, not accusatory, not emotional, just placing facts on the table like evidence before a military tribunal. Preston stopped mid-gesture. I could see him running calculations, trying to remember exactly what Austin had been wearing, exactly what that meant for company liability and representation policies. And your wife was 3 board members away when it happened, Curtis added. She had direct line of sight to the interaction, clear observation of both the incident and the response protocol. Now Preston was genuinely quiet, not strategically quiet, just processing the tactical implications. Victoria's proximity meant this wasn't something that happened in a corner, wasn't something that could be dismissed as misunderstanding or poor communication. Garrett shifted in his seat, opened his mouth like he was about to say something, then closed it again, looked at me, then at Preston, then down at his legal pad covered in notes that weren't going to help him navigate this situation. I watched him make a decision in real time, and the decision he made was to say absolutely nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know about Garrett Morrison's leadership style, his risk tolerance, his institutional loyalty versus personal integrity. When pressure applied, when moral clarity was required, when someone needed to stand up and take a position, Garrett's instinct was self-preservation. Preston kept going. Used the word optics 3 times in 2 minutes. Used minor twice. Used disproportionate once. Directed at no one in particular, but clearly meant for me. He spoke with the confidence of a man who'd never been in a room where his authority was genuinely questioned, where his family name didn't automatically confer final decision-making power. I let him run because every sentence he said on that live feed was being archived by company servers, and every sentence was making my next move easier to justify to institutional partners, regulatory bodies, and industry analysts who would inevitably review this footage. The challenge coin was warm in my palm now, worn smooth from 20 years of tactical decision-making. Time to execute the mission. Finally, Garrett asked the question I'd been waiting for. Asked it carefully, almost reluctantly, like a man walking through a minefield. Marcus, what exactly is your role in final authorization for this commitment? Preston jumped in before I finished inhaling. He's here representing the Capital Partner Consortium, standard due diligence oversight, final compliance review before fund transfer authorization. I let the word representing hang in the air for exactly one beat. Let everyone in the room process what Preston had just assumed about my authority level, about my decision-making capacity, about who was actually holding the authorization codes. Then I said, I don't represent the capital partner. Quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight that changes atmospheric pressure in a room. I'm the managing partner. I'm the sole signatory on the primary funding mechanism. Final authorization for all $2.4 billion. All of it goes through me. The recalculation happened at different speeds for different people. Mitchell closed his binder with a soft thud that seemed louder than it should have. A director 2 seats down stopped reaching for his coffee and left his hand suspended in midair for a moment before slowly pulling it back. One of the investor relations reps leaned back in her chair, like she'd just realized she was sitting next to a bomb. Garrett's face went through several expressions in rapid sequence. Surprise, then calculation, then something that looked like nausea. His pending CEO appointment was contingent on successful capital, close and smooth transition. No close meant no transition. No transition meant he was sitting in a boardroom, watching his carefully planned career trajectory disintegrate in real time. Preston's jaw tightened, then smoothed out with practiced corporate control. Then let's move forward constructively. We're all professionals here. We can address any concerns through proper channels, establish clear communication protocols, ensure this kind of misunderstanding doesn't happen again. Constructive requires acknowledgement, I said. You can't fix what you won't admit is broken. Acknowledgement of what exactly? Preston's voice carried the edge of a man who'd run out of diplomatic options. My son made a social error, poor judgment in a networking environment. These things happen. Young people sometimes lack appropriate social filters. Your son didn't embarrass a guest last night, I said. He tested a covenant. He tested whether respect for military service matters in your corporate culture, whether accountability applies to family members, whether leadership responds to misconduct or enables it through silence. That landed differently than I expected, or maybe exactly as I intended. Curtis looked down at the table. 2 directors exchanged glances that said they were already calculating their own exposure. Mitchell still hadn't moved, still looking at his closed binder like it contained tactical intelligence that might help navigate this situation. The challenge coin was warm in my palm, edges worn smooth from decades of decision-making under pressure. Sergeant Major Rodriguez had carried it through 3 tours before passing it to me. Leadership isn't about the rank on your collar, he'd said. It's about the decisions you make when everything's on the line, when doing the right thing costs more than doing nothing. Preston folded his hands on the table, corporate body language designed to project calm authority. We are not turning a social incident into structural instability. That is not happening in this room. Not on my watch. I placed my phone face up on the table. Not as a threat, just clarity about what was about to happen. Tell me, I said, why I should believe this won't happen again when the cameras are off, when there's no board meeting scheduled, when your son thinks nobody important is watching. No one answered. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to understand that this wasn't a rhetorical question. I was genuinely asking for data, for evidence, for some indication that institutional culture change was possible under current leadership structure. P. Preston straightened up, looked around the table once, not for support this time, to confirm the room was still his, that his 28 years of building this company still counted for something, that family legacy still carried institutional weight. We are not issuing any public statement over this, he said with finality. There is nothing to apologize for. The footage can be contextualized. We can clarify intent, provide appropriate context for what was clearly a miscommunication between parties who didn't know each other. Intent. He kept coming back to intent, like motivation could retroactively change impact, like explaining why something happened could undo the fact that it happened. The clause doesn't mention intent anywhere in its language, not once. I wrote it that way on purpose. Learned that lesson the hard way in Afghanistan when good intentions cost me 3 soldiers. I waited 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable for everyone except me. In combat situations, you learn that the most powerful moment often comes right before you act, when the enemy knows something is about to happen but doesn't know exactly what. Then I picked up the phone. Activate section 14.2. I said, same tone I'd used to order coffee. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, no theatrical emphasis. Just words that meant something specific to one person on the other end of the line. Words that would trigger a sequence of legal and financial events that couldn't be reversed once initiated. Sarah Chen, my general counsel, confirmed receipt without hesitation. We'd worked together for 12 years, been through hostile takeovers, regulatory investigations, congressional oversight hearings. She knew my voice, knew my decision-making patterns, knew that when I used that tone, there was no discussion needed about motivation or context. Formal notice, drafted and filed, she said. Immediate suspension of capital commitment effective now. Full withdrawal notice to follow within the hour per section 14.2 protocols. Already preparing documentation, I said. I ended the call. For a moment, absolutely nothing happened. The room held its breath like the moment between lightning and thunder, everyone knowing impact was coming but not knowing exactly when or how severe. Then Mitchell's phone vibrated against the mahogany table. One short buzz that seemed to echo in the silence. He looked at the screen. His face didn't collapse. Mitchell was too experienced for dramatic reactions, but something behind his eyes went very still. He set the phone face down without saying a word. Preston watched him do it, trying to read Mitchell's expression for intelligence about what was happening. That's just procedural notification, Preston said quickly. Temporary administrative hold. Standard protocol. We'll have legal counsel address it within the hour, get it cleared up through proper channels. Mitchell didn't respond, didn't confirm or deny Preston's interpretation. Just sat there with the quiet stillness of a man who'd seen incoming artillery and knew the best response was to take cover and wait for the barrage to end. A second vibration. Longer this time. Mitchell flipped the phone over, read the screen with military precision, set it back down without changing expression. But I saw what it said before he turned it face down again. Withdrawal notice executed. Funds transfer permanently suspended. That's when other phones started going. Not all at once. 1, then 2, then 5. Then nearly everyone at the table had something lighting up or buzzing or both. Assistants texting urgent questions. Legal departments calling for clarification. Investor relations getting inquiries they had no prepared answers for. The kind of communication cascade that happens when institutional confidence shifts in real time. On the wall-mounted screen behind Preston, the one that had been cycling through his presentation slides about historic transitions and strategic growth, a market ticker appeared. Someone in the AV booth had switched the feed without being asked, without instruction from anyone in the room. Pre-market indicators, -6%. A pause, -9%. -12%. Nobody touched the remote to change it back. Preston looked at the screen, then at the room, then directly at me. You're not going to collapse a $4 billion structure over a social incident, he said, still confident, still certain this was negotiation theater. This is a positioning tactic. I've seen it before in hostile takeover attempts. I know what leverage looks like. I don't leverage, I said. I document facts and make decisions based on operational intelligence. Curtis spoke before Preston could respond. The notice has been executed, he said with the flat authority of someone reading tactical intelligence. That's not a negotiating position. That's a completed legal action. He turned to board counsel at the end of the table. We need to discuss immediate fiduciary exposure and governance implications. Preston turned on him with the sharpness of a commanding officer whose authority had just been questioned by his own staff. We're not having that conversation right now. Not in this room, not on camera. We're already having it, Curtis said. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't showing emotion, didn't need to. 20 years on corporate boards teaches you when institutional authority has shifted, when crisis management becomes survival management. Garrett had gone very quiet, staring at the ticker on the wall. -14% now. His pending appointment as CEO was contingent on successful capital close and smooth leadership transition. No close meant no transition. No transition meant he was standing in a boardroom watching his carefully constructed career plan dissolve in real time while the cameras documented every moment for future legal review. Preston tried one more tactical approach. Turned to me directly, leaning forward with the body language of someone making a final reasonable offer. You've made your point. Marcus, message received. Let's step outside, just the two of us, and find a constructive path forward. This doesn't have to be public. We can address concerns through appropriate channels. It's already public, I said. The feed has been running for 45 minutes. Every word is archived. He glanced at the red indicator lights in the corners of the room, and something crossed his face. Not panic, but the closest thing to it I'd seen from him all morning. The realization that damage control was no longer possible, that institutional reputation was being determined in real time by forces beyond his control. Then we address it constructively on camera, he said, recovering with practiced corporate crisis management. We acknowledge a miscommunication between parties. We commit to enhanced communication protocols. We move forward with appropriate institutional oversight. That's what responsible leadership looks like. Miscommunication, I repeated. Your son looked at my badge, looked at my suit, and told me military contractors belonged at the service entrance. Then he poured his drink on me in front of 200 people while your wife watched and walked away without comment. I paused. What exactly was miscommunicated? The room went very still. Preston didn't answer immediately. What he did instead was look around the table one more time. But this time I think he was genuinely looking for someone to say something, anything, to redirect the conversation, to intervene, to give him some kind of foothold in a situation that was sliding beyond his control. Nobody moved. The ticker hit -16%. Curtis cleared his throat with the authority of someone who'd navigated corporate crises before. I'm calling for executive session. Board members only. Preston's head turned toward him slowly, like a turret tracking a target. I am the chairman of this board. Yes, Curtis said quietly. For now. That was the moment. Not the clause activation, not the withdrawal notice, not even the ticker. It was those two words, for now, spoken quietly by a man who had sat on 12 corporate boards over 20 years and knew exactly what they meant and exactly when to say them. The motion came from a director near the end of the table. Administrative leave for the board chairman pending comprehensive governance review. Preston called it panic decision-making. Used the word overreach twice, reminded the room that he had built this company from a regional logistics operation into a $4 billion infrastructure group over 28 years of dedicated leadership. Nobody disputed that achievement. They voted anyway. The motion carried. Not unanimously, 2 abstentions, 1 dissent, but it carried with the institutional weight of fiduciary responsibility overriding personal loyalty. Preston sat in his chair for a moment after the vote. Not because he was refusing to leave, but because I think he just hadn't fully processed yet that the room had changed without him, that authority had transferred through democratic process, while the cameras documented every moment for regulatory and legal review. Then he stood, straightened his jacket with military precision, and walked out. The cameras caught all of it. Market opened at 9:30 a.m. By 9:45, it was no longer speculative. I watched the real-time impact from a conference room 2 floors below the boardroom. Mitchell had quietly offered it to me after the session ended. No explanation, just opened the door and said it was available if I needed space to make calls. By 10 to 20, the stock was down 17%. Not a collapse. That's noise and chaos. This was compression. Market compression. The difference is important. Compression is the market quietly, efficiently repricing everything it thought it understood about a company based on new information about leadership character and institutional culture. Credit agencies flagged the company for governance review before noon. 2 institutional partners paused secondary investment commitments pending clarification of leadership structure. 3 banking relationships requested updated risk exposure models before close of business. The capital vacuum wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just measurable, quantifiable, and immediate. I was on my 4th call when someone knocked on the conference room door. I wrapped up, set the phone down, said come in. Sophia Whitfield, Preston's niece, 26 years old, works in corporate communications. Had been at the gala the night before. I'd noticed her near the entrance talking to a group of regional officials about infrastructure modernization and job creation. She came in and stood near the door, didn't take a seat. I wanted to say something before you left, she said. I waited. What Austin did last night was wrong. What my Aunt Victoria did, not saying anything, that was wrong too. She paused, choosing words carefully. I know that doesn't change the outcome. I just didn't want you to leave thinking everyone in this family thought that behavior was acceptable. I looked at her for a moment. She wasn't reading from a corporate script, wasn't doing damage control PR. Just a 26-year-old who had watched something happen and didn't want to be counted among the people who said nothing. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. It doesn't change the structural outcome, but it matters that you said it. She nodded once and left. I sat there for a minute after she walked out. In 22 years of business after military service, that was maybe the third time someone from the other side of a deal had done something like that. It stays with you, not because it changes anything operationally. It doesn't, but because it reminds you that institutional problems are usually concentrated at the top. The people below are often just trying to figure out how to survive in cultures that leadership creates and maintains. By closing bell, the number was locked in, -17%. Financial analysts moved quickly with their assessments: governance instability, leadership credibility risk, investor withdrawal linked to cultural miscalculation. The language varied by publication, but the conclusion was consistent across all major business media. 3 weeks later, Preston asked to meet. No cameras, no board members, no assistants or legal counsel. Just a conference room in a building he no longer technically controlled, overlooking a river that moved more steadily than his stock price had. He arrived before me, which surprised me, was sitting when I walked in, not at the head of the table. Either someone had advised him about power dynamics, or he'd figured it out himself. First accurate read he'd had on a room in weeks. I sat across from him. He looked older than he had in the boardroom. Not dramatically, just the way men look when something they built stops being something they control. You could have warned me, he said without preamble. I did, I said. When your son poured that drink and you heard about it the next morning and called it social misunderstanding on a live corporate feed. He exhaled slowly through his nose. That was a poor choice of words. It was an accurate choice. That's the problem. We were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a barge moved slowly along the river, carrying cargo with the steady efficiency that built American commerce. We both watched it for a few seconds without meaning to. I built that company for 28 years, he said. Regional logistics to $4 billion in infrastructure assets. Created 12,000 jobs? That's not nothing. No, I said it's not, and the company is still standing. I didn't destroy what you built. I pulled a funding commitment that hadn't transferred yet. What happened to the stock price? That was the market pricing what it observed on that live feed. Those are two different things. He looked at me with the calculation of someone trying to determine if negotiation was still possible. Is there a path back for the capital under new leadership, not under your family's institutional control? He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer but needed to hear it confirmed. Then what was the point of this meeting? You asked for it, I said. I came because I thought you deserved a conversation that wasn't conducted in front of cameras or board votes. He sat with that for a moment. You really believe one incident at a social event justified all this? I believe one incident revealed everything I needed to know about institutional character under pressure. Austin's behavior, Victoria's response, your crisis management approach, Garrett's leadership style. I didn't manufacture a crisis. I documented one that already existed. He didn't argue with that assessment. It was new territory for him. We sat for another minute without talking, then both stood at the same time, the way people do when a conversation has reached its natural conclusion. No handshake, no hostility. Just the end of something that had run its course through institutional process and market forces. Here's what I want you to understand about this whole situation. Austin Whitfield thought he was dismissing a military contractor. He was actually disrespecting the only person in that room who understood what his father's company was truly worth and who had 22 years of business experience, plus 15 years of military service, telling him exactly what that family's leadership culture looked like when nobody important was watching. Victoria turned away when it happened. That single turn cost her husband his chairmanship and her family $2.4 billion in institutional capital. Preston called it a social misunderstanding on live camera and treated a major funding commitment like a public relations problem. Garrett watched it all happen and said nothing until 11 p.m. in a forward text message, then discovered that in corporate governance, silence is never neutral. It prices you every time. I didn't pull that commitment because my feelings were hurt. I've been in this business long enough that entitled behavior from young men doesn't personally affect me. I pulled it because I finally had sufficient operational intelligence to confirm what I'd suspected since the first due diligence review. This was a family that had confused inherited position with earned authority. The contract clause didn't punish the insult. It enforced accountability standards that should exist in every major business relationship. That's the only meaningful difference between personal anger and institutional consequence, and in the end, it's everything that matters. The challenge coin sits on my desk now next to quarterly reports and market analyses. It reminds me daily that respect isn't something you inherit through family name or corporate position. Respect is earned through service, tested under pressure, and proven through consistent actions when character costs more than convenience. Austin Whitfield learned that lesson the expensive way. It cost his family their institutional authority and $2.4 billion in committed capital. Some education comes with a price tag, but it's the only kind that creates lasting change.